Due Process, winner of 21 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights and the 2012 Mid-Atlantic Emmys for Outstanding Interview Special and Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
Whether you pounded the pavement or picked up the phone, whether you held an Obama sign or a Romney sign, you made your voice heard, and you made a difference.
So the votes were counted, the victor declared, the long campaign over. But questions about how we choose a president, those go on. The American way of voting. Could there be a better way? The Electoral College and more on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
An unprecedented number of dollars were spent, a record number of votes were cast, and when the popular vote was counted, just 3 percentage points stood between the winner and the loser. Then how did Barack Obama walk away with more than 60% of the electoral votes? I'm Sandra King, and that's just one of the odd election questions we'll tackle in the next half hour, beginning with what may be the oddest of them all, the Electoral College. What is this thing anyway? We start our answer with the help of filmmaker C.G.P. Gray, who explains just how the Electoral College works.
Election day, when Americans everywhere cast their ballot for the next president of the United States. Except, not really. Americans don't directly vote for president. So what's happening on Election Day then? It's a bit complicated because of something called the Electoral College. To keep things simple for now, think of the Electoral College as the collection of 538 votes that determine who the President of the United States will be. Why 538? Because that's the number of senators, 100, plus the number of representatives, 438 in Congress. Why are there 438 representatives in Congress? Stop asking so many questions right now, we're trying to keep this simple. These 538 votes in the Electoral College aren't given to the citizens directly, but are instead divided among the states. So how does the Electoral College give out the votes? Each state, no matter how populous or not, gets 3 votes to start. The remaining votes are given out roughly in proportion to the population of the states. The more people the state has, the more votes it gets. Here's a map of the United States showing the voting power each state has by making one hexagon equal to one Electoral College vote for president. Because Electoral College votes mostly, though not completely, scale with population, it's also a map of where people live with a bonus given to the smaller states to make them a bit bigger than they would otherwise be. In early November, when citizens go to the polls, they aren't voting for president directly, but they're really telling their state how they want it to use its electoral votes. 48 of the 50 states give all their Electoral College votes to the candidate who wins a majority in their state. Take Florida, for example, which has 29 Electoral College votes. If a candidate wins a majority, no matter how small that majority, he gets all the votes. So the path to the White House is clear. Win enough majorities in enough states to get more than half of the Electoral College votes, and you get to sit at the big desk.
And Barack Obama gets that big desk for another 4 years. Now, you may find that cause for elation or despair. But either way, you may well have doubts about the way we vote. Is it really as democratic, with a small d, as it could be? Thomas Gentile, a one-time campaign coordinator for Rudy Giuliani and an activist with the conservative Federalist Society, has some thoughts about that. So does Rutgers Prof. Marc Holzer, Dean of the School of Public Affairs and Administration, whose work on government performance and productivity has included our way of electing our leaders. Welcome to you both. And let me start by asking you, Marc, we just saw a little rundown on the Electoral College. Firstly, do many of us know what our friend Gray was trying to impart to us there, and does it make sense?
Well, first of all, many of us do not know what the Electoral College represents. I think probably 99% of voters feel they're just voting democratically with a small d, and that they have equal weight with others.
And are they?
No. They don't have equal weight, obviously. I mean, the election is skewed, in effect, because the Electoral College is based on the premise that the voters can't be trusted. In effect, you know, the founders created the Electoral College as a check on the voters. And that means that it's open to manipulation, in effect. There's at least a couple of things wrong with it that could really undermine the legitimacy of the system. One is, if you win the Electoral College, but you lose the popular vote, and that happens over and over, which is a very likely thing, then voters will lose trust in the system, right? So that's one major problem with the system. The other is what can happen after the vote. Now, what I was worried about with this vote was that if Obama had won, you know, the Electoral College without winning the popular vote, then the Republican Party might have reversed its position from 2000 and tried to influence some of the electors. 2000,
of course, being both the most recent and the most dramatic example we've had. I think there have been 4 in our history.
Exactly.
And Gore Bush being the one that we all lived through. And I have a feeling, Tom, that as you're listening to Marc talk about this, you're saying, now he's got it wrong.
Well, I think there are a lot of benefits to the Electoral College system. The first is that it benefits the legitimacy of our democracy in that it requires a successful presidential candidate to achieve support from a broader coalition of Americans than a direct popular vote would require. A regional candidate, or a candidate who draws his support only from one particular base in the country, cannot win under the Electoral College.
Yeah, but don't some of us from a region like this one in fact have our votes discounted?
Well, the votes aren't discounted because that big pile of electoral votes from New Jersey did end up in Barack Obama's column. So the votes that were cast in New Jersey certainly did matter. They certainly contributed to putting Barack Obama over the top. Barack Obama's victory in this election is legitimized by the fact that he won states like Ohio, like Florida, which he was required to campaign in and fight for because of the Electoral College. There's a lot of division in this country. A lot of the Romney supporters are not happy with the result. Imagine the level of division that we would be experiencing right now if Barack Obama had been able to win simply by churning out all of the Democratic votes that could be found in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and a few other urban centers. No, the Electoral College required him to go to places like Iowa and New Hampshire, and anyone who's unhappy with the victory of Barack Obama, who questions the legitimacy of the victory, has to face up to the fact that Barack Obama won Ohio, New Hampshire,
How about the fact that all we heard about in the last weeks of the election was Ohio?
Well, that's exactly it. The Electoral College, because of the way, you know, the way things break, means that you can just emphasize a few states, Ohio, Florida, you know, even though it didn't come in late, a few other states like Colorado, for example. But so the Ohio vote was worth more than the New Jersey vote? Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, what happened with both candidates is you saw these maps at the the last few weeks. They were just bouncing around 9 states. The other states were ignored, and there were many states where neither candidate visited for the entire electoral process. So I think the Electoral College is not serving us well. It's just narrowing us down to fights in a few states, and it's not really providing exposure of the candidates naturally, whether it's in person or on TV. I want to give Tom a chance to answer that, but first, while we're still on the Electoral College, let's turn to an excerpt from the Trio Pictures documentary, Electoral Dysfunction, with the very funny Mo Rocca.
Do you know where I can find the Electoral College?
No, I'm from Tennessee.
For the presidential race, did you cast your ballot for David or for Ben?
For David or for Ben? Oh, Gee, I didn't think about David or Ben.
You're voting for somebody to actually vote for your candidate, so...
I don't know.
And you were aware that he's one of the electors?
Yeah. Actually, no.
So you ended up casting your vote for
Ben.
And 10 other Obama electors.
Yes.
So that on December 15th, they can
Vote for Barack Obama.
Okay, and that makes sense.
Yes.
Really?
No, not at all.
As it happens, most people didn't know who David and Ben were, or of the role the Electoral College plays in shaping the candidate's strategy. They just wanted to vote.
So, Tom, getting back to what I know you were anxious to say to Marc, let's factor in what I think was a pretty astute, if clever, way of looking at the Electoral College that people don't know about. They don't actually know that they're not voting directly for president. Is any of that a cause for alarm?
I think that whereas most citizens might not know the mechanics of the Electoral College, they don't know the names of the slate of electors that they're voting for, I think it's very deeply ingrained in the political culture of the United States that we vote for president as states. I think that campaigning for states, winning individual states is something that the average American voter does understand and does appreciate, and it's something we all watch on election nights as the returns come in state by state. The question of swing states needs to be addressed by looking at why individual swing states are so important in each election. And the reason is that the states that turn out to be swing states in any given year are microcosms of the nation. Ohio, for example, and Florida as well, are representative of the United States as a whole in the issues that are important to the people, in the divisions between the two political parties within those states. They are representative of the nation as a whole. And what I find fascinating is that over time, the swing states change. 10 years ago, no one would have imagined that we were talking about Michigan as a possible swing state. And believe it or not, it was only as recently as 1988 that a Republican, George H.W. Bush, won California. So the swing states do change over time. Every state gets their turn to be the focus of attention, and it's valuable to have the issues studied closely and voted on in those crucibles.
And how did we get this Electoral College?
We got this Electoral College because the Founding Fathers, in drafting the Constitution, were concerned that one candidate could win the presidency by securing support only from one small part of the nation. In the early years of our republic, the concern was North versus South. Now it's different. Now we talk about the coasts versus the center of the country.
Right, and one of the interesting pieces that I read in the Washington Post on this subject says, no, it wasn't to protect the small states, it was to protect the slave states, which had small populations of voting eligible people, but large populations if you counted the slaves as 3/5 of a human being. Of course, you didn't let them vote, but you counted them as 3/5 of a human being. Should that be a consideration, Marc, as we look at whether or not to hold this sacrosanct?
Well, I don't think we should give disproportionate weight to any states. Right now we do that because there's a minimum of 3 electoral votes that goes to any state because of the 2 senators and the one representative that they have. But I think the Electoral College is really a function of elitism. And it was, I go back to the point that it was a distrust of the average voter. Now remember that only property owners could vote when the Electoral College was created. It took years for white male non-property owners to get the right to vote. Then it took much longer time for women to gain the right to vote and for African Americans to be allowed to vote. And we're still fighting that battle. Whether they can be displaced from the polls, whether they can be discouraged from voting, in a sense, which goes back to what was done in the South for a long, long time, Reconstruction and thereafter.
So if you were calling the shots, would you throw it away?
Yes, I would, because I think that in terms of the legitimacy of the system, people are going to want to know that their vote counts equally.
Any possibility that it could get thrown away, given the fact that it is embedded in the Constitution, and given the fact that you'd need 38 states, including some of those small states that count on it?
Well, realistically, maybe not in the near future, but if you look at the long term, We are the only country in the world that has such a system. It's just not viable in terms of our representing democracy as a legitimate form of government, legitimate premise of government, you know, for the rest of the world. I mean, how can we argue that we are fully democratic when we have this intermediary, you know, body?
What about the possibility, because I don't think we can get rid of the Electoral College, but we don't have to apportion our electors as we do. Have you thought about that, Tom, and whether there might be a better way to do it,
well,
rather than a winner-take-all, which we have in 48 of 50 states?
Well, some states have given consideration to adopting the model that Maine and Nebraska have already taken on. This discussion has been particularly intense in Pennsylvania. The idea of allotting the electors in a different way by percentage of the popular vote within the state or by congressional districts.
Make more sense to you?
I think that we have to recognize that attempts to change the system in that way will be motivated by political considerations.
And therefore?
And therefore, it's going to be a tough test of the Electoral College to see if it can withstand such changes.
Well, there are so many misconceptions about voting, beginning with our very right to vote, a right that our friends from Electoral Dysfunction went looking for with some tongue-in-cheek help from Mo Rocca.
Luckily, we happened upon a giant copy of the Constitution and went to work. You're up in Article 1. Is there anything there?
Nothing. This is the wrong copy, I think.
No, this is the...
No, this is the Constitution.
This is the Constitution.
I think it's that.
Yeah, no, Sam, I think you're over in Congress right here. Any voting there?
I don't find. Let me see.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Nothing about voting. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything. But even using a high-tech magnifying device, we were coming up empty. I decided I needed help from an expert. I've been looking all over the Constitution for the right to vote, and I can't find it.
I'm not surprised. There is no right to vote in the Constitution.
You're not kidding me.
No, I'm not kidding you. The Constitution at the nation's birth made no mention of voting rights whatsoever.
Did they just forget to?
No, they didn't forget to. They were unsure, in fact, whether voting was a right or a privilege. And if it was a right, they weren't sure who the right actually belonged to.
This constitutional silence on the right to vote puts the U.S. in the company of nations like Libya, Iran, and Indonesia.
Well, so talking about the way we vote, the Electoral College is only one of the interesting things, and one of the things that we do differently from most of the world. The question of when we vote, this idea of Tuesday, one day, although part of the country's moved away from it, New Jersey's still pretty much there. Is that something we should be looking at, Mark? When we look at making better government, more democratic voting, what about this idea of having a Tuesday when we go to vote? Why not a Saturday or a Sunday or both?
Why not the 60 days before that Tuesday?
That's the next question.
It's very clear that people want to do that. That in the states across the country that allowed that, there was very heavy early voting. In the states that didn't allow
30
that,
million votes were,
That's right.
were cast before we ever got to Election Day, which is fascinating.
Right, and in the states that did not allow that, or where there were attempts to limit that, severely, there were strong objections, and there were demands for early voting. I think we're going to see much more early voting, the next time around.
So should we do away? There is the possibility of just voting by email.
No, you shouldn't do it. Shouldn't do away with it, because there are many people who feel they want to walk into the voting booth. They want to, pull the lever, if there's still
Isn't
a
that
lever,
just because they know
or
it?
put something in a box, or vote on a screen, or whatever. That's symbolic to
So
them.
keep it for those people?
Sure. That's still that's
Keep it on a
large
Tuesday,
section.
Tom?
You need an ending point.
Keep it on a Tuesday or move it to a weekend?
I don't think it would make much of a difference to move it to a weekend.
You don't think more people would turn out?
No, I think that the turnout would be constant. I think that we've seen repeatedly through recent history that attempts to increase turnout through mechanisms to make it easier for people to vote have essentially resulted in the same turnout in the same proportion among political parties.
See, I know so many people who say, not on a presidential date, which, you know, I think people take a little more seriously, but certainly when it comes to school board elections and local elections, and you say, did you vote? And they say, oh, I had to go to work, and I didn't get home on time. Why not make it on a Saturday or Sunday? Is this a nod to religion, that we don't schedule these things on a Saturday or a Sunday? In fear of offending one religion or another?
I think that moving the election to a Saturday or a Sunday, you know, would conceivably make it more convenient for some people, but I don't think it would have a marked impact on the turnout that people would have. I think.
And what about early voting? Because I think much of what we're talking about here reflects a different political outlook from each of you, and you know, somewhat predictable when we talk about something like the Electoral College. But when we talk about early voting, do you separate from Marc on that too?
I think that the mechanisms employed for early voting have to be executed in a way that maintains the integrity of the vote. For example, you mentioned the possibility of email voting. I think a mechanism to vote electronically and remotely could be viable if it is done in a way that makes sure that the vote is secure. But to allow anyone who has any email address to go cast a vote.
Well, but no, you know, I think of it like PayPal. Right? We all use PayPal.
And we trust it.
And we trust it. And it can vet us in a matter of about 10 seconds and know whether we are, or less, and know whether we are whom we say we are.
Right.
What about that?
Well, you have PayPal, you have ATMs, you have e-commerce. You know, all of this, you know, something we've come to trust. There's no technical obstacle to people voting electronically.
So e-voting makes sense to you?
E-voting, electronic voting makes sense. It also makes sense to me to have voting in person on the weekend. I mean, I would conclude the election on a Sunday. I think you get a much higher turnout. There are many people who have difficulty, you know, during the work week. I think there are objections. There are political objections to that because, frankly, the black churches, you know, get out heavy vote on. You know, on the Sunday before the election, and you know that can stir, you know, things up on the other side in a sense. But
okay, so let me move on to one that's more controversial and yet not as far-fetched as it might seem, and that is compulsory voting. Australia does it, Brazil does it. You've got more than 30 countries that are doing it, 10 that actually hold people responsible with penalties if you don't show up. What do you think about that?
Well, the argument for compulsory voting is the notion that a lot of people don't take their responsibility to vote seriously.
Exactly the argument.
But there are a lot of people who choose not to vote. And I believe that their right to make that expression of not voting,
the right not to speak by not voting,
is just as important as the right to go out and select a candidate.
Of course, you know, in Australia, for instance, you can go to the polls and not vote. You just have to be there. You've got to show up, unless you've got a really good excuse. So you don't like it.
I think it creates a bureaucratic mess then, or how are people going to claim the excuses not to vote, and then do you have to go prove the validity of your excuse? I think with regard to the notion of compulsory voting, I think our system's working fine as it is.
And you say, well, think about it?
I'm not so sure I'm in favor of compulsory voting, but maybe for a different reason. That the system that we saw was not working all that well on Election Day has problems. In other words, people show up at the polls and they're not permitted to vote because there are identification problems, which are only going to get worse if states like Pennsylvania really do implement, you know, these voter ID laws. So I'm not sure we could fairly implement compulsory voting.
So let me ask you quickly, when we come back here 4 years from now, are we going to still be talking about whether our voting could be more democratic? Will anything have changed? And I've got about 15 seconds.
I think we'll still be talking about things because in America we always strive to improve our democracy, and
Marc?
we'll be doing it 4 years from now.
I think we're going to find that there are more attempts to disenfranchise voters through these ID laws and other mechanisms 4 years from now. It's only just begun, and I think we have to be vigilant about protecting our democracy.
Well, with so much more to say, That is it for this edition of Due Process. But we'll be back next week and every week on the air and online. You can see us on demand on our YouTube channel, on the NJTV website, and starting this week on our new Due Process website. Check us out on dueprocesstv.rutgers.edu and watch us in real time on Sundays at 9:30 and 7, and now every Tuesday night as well at 11:30. On NJTV. Till then, for Ray Brown, who had this one off, I'm Sandra King. Thanks for watching.
Together, because we are not as divided as our politics suggests. We're not as cynical as the pundits believe. We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions, and we remain more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America. And together, with your help and God's grace, we will continue our journey forward and remind the world just why it is that we live in the greatest nation on earth. Thank you, America. God bless you. God bless these United States.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and watch us on demand on YouTube.